great to see everyone. I'm going to begin, but I always like to look and see first who's here. It's great to see who's with us. It's a pleasure to see everyone here, and I'm going to let me just end the video. We're now on Facebook. Okay. So it's a great pleasure to see everyone with us here tonight. Welcome from near and far, wherever you are. It's wonderful to see you, and I'm thrilled to be again here in Los Angeles. To all of our participants around the country, around the world. I know sometimes we get people from other countries that join in with us, so it's really a great pleasure. And before I begin to talk about Chanukah and the two topics that we're going to cover tonight and next week, I know that today somehow somebody decided that today is what they call Giving Tuesday. So the Sephardic Educational Center did not participate in Giving Tuesday because actually 2 weeks from tonight, it's also a Tuesday, is going to be dedicated to Giving Tuesday for the Sephardic Educational Center. When I say that, it's not only going to be a program about giving, although we are celebrating with great, great pride the Sephardic Educational Center 40 years of activity in the Sephardic world. And when I say activity, what we're doing here with teaching classes online, that's the very least of it. I mean, we have been at the forefront in the Sephardic world of taking young people from all over the world. We have a history and experience in North America, in South America, in Mexico, in Turkey, in England, I don't know where else, but many, many, many countries. And we have thousands of alumni who have been part of our Israel trips, our signature Israel trips from 1980 to as recently as summer of 2019. We have one scheduled in theory for summer of 2021, where I'm not sure it's really going to be able to take place under the circumstances. We're going to pray that yes. And these are trips that from the 1980s and 1990s and 2000s, long before Birthright. We were doing Birthright before it was Birthright. We had trips for high school students, for college students, for young adults, young professionals, married couples, families. And all of this is centered in one of the most beautiful locations on earth, the most beautiful Jewish location on earth, the old city of Jerusalem. That's the home of the Sephardic Educational Center. And I don't want to turn this into a promotional tonight, but I want to ask you to mark your calendars for 2 weeks from tonight. 2 weeks from tonight at this time, please God, we'll be celebrating Chanukah, not just talking about it like we will tonight and next week. And when we celebrate Chanukah in 2 weeks, the Sephardic Educational Center is going to put on a beautiful program. You know, with the celebration of our 40th anniversary, we had a beautiful gala in the works. Just about every year or every other year, depending on the year, we've had one of the most unique programs in the Sephardic world, one of the most unique programs here in Los Angeles. Hooray for Hollywood, red carpet. We have the Sephardic Film Festival that takes place most recently. It's taken place in many venues, but in the last several years, in the last 10, 12 years, it's taken place at Paramount Studios. It is a real red carpet event, to the point, by the way, that I never realized this until the last several years, where there are actually wannabe celebrities or budding celebrities for whom it looks good to walk a red carpet, any red carpet. And I've actually received emails a few months before our Sephardic Film Festival from celebrities, people who are trying to break into the business. And their agents have contacted me and said they would even pay us a fee if they could bring their, candidates to come walk and be photographed at the red carpet because, social media looks good. The fact that they were being photographed with Sephardic celebrities and Sephardic community members, cool, it's great. I think we invited one of them. I don't even remember if they ever showed up or not, but it was, it's a real live red carpet event. I actually call our Sephardic Educational Center Film Festival the Sephardic Academy Awards, Tony Awards, and Emmy Awards, and even Grammy Awards, all wrapped into one. It's a fantastic event. And we were planning a beautiful one for the 40th anniversary of the Sephardic Educational Center, where we were going to potentially honor many wonderful people and bring back alumni and some of our past celebrity honorees. We have an outstanding award that we invented. It is one of the most important awards in the entertainment industry, unique to the Sephardic world. It's called the Cinema Sepharad Award. I'll tell you a quick funny story about it. One of our honorees, who then came back and was actually an MC a few years later, is Sean Tube. Sean Tube is an actor. You may have seen him recently on the show that was on Apple TV, an Israeli show called Tehran. Sean Tube is Persian by origin, and he was one of the stars in Tehran. But he's done many films, and many years ago, we honored him with the Cinema Sepharad Award. So he was the recipient of this award that we created called the Cinema Sepharad. I believe, I don't know if Sarita Fields is on here. I believe her and Neil Sheff created this award and gave it to many people in the beginning. And then each year we had a Sephardic celebrity who we honored. And Sean Tube came back, I remember, to MC a Sephardic film festival. And he actually got up, and he was very funny. He has a great sense of humor. And he said, you know, I'm doing a movie with Robert De Niro. Now, you all know who Robert De Niro is. Nobody's ever heard, no, everyone knows who Robert De Niro is. So he said, you know, I'm on stage with Robert De Niro, and I went up to him and I put my arm around him and I said, Bobby, you know, I want to talk to you. I want to make you feel better because, you know, I know that you feel down about something because what you've got is Academy Awards, Oscars, American Film Institute Awards, but there's one award that even if you tried, you can't get that award. And I have it. It's called the Cinema Sepharad Award, given to me by the Sephardic Educational Center. You may have Academy Awards, and I could be eligible for an Academy Award as well. I may not win, but I'm eligible. But you're not eligible to receive the Sephardic Film Festival Award called the Cinema Sepharad Award. It was very cute. We've honored wonderful people, and we were planning on having this big gala, but you know, the world had different plans for all of us. So 2 weeks from tonight, we're not calling this a virtual gala. I hate that term. I hate those virtual galas. I think they're really cheesy and just, you know, people spilling a lot of money into what turns out to be a Zoom video and nothing more. We're gonna have a beautiful Hanukkah candle lighting. We're gonna have music, and we're gonna have tributes. We've collected tribute videos from all over the world, from some of our alumni who are now married with kids, some of our recent alumni from the Hamsa Israel trip who have gone on this trip in the last few years and have been inspired to be part of it, and from some of our celebrities, some wonderful celebrities. We already have collected video tributes from Sephardic celebrities here in the United States, in Israel. Wonderful people that we've honored in the past have already sent in their video tributes. Watch the email, you'll get more information. You got an opportunity to register and to be part of this. And we do hope that you will also support us that night because the funds that we would have raised, we don't expect, of course, that this will in any way replace what we would have done at Paramount Studios and that kind of program. But we hope that nonetheless, when you'll see that little number on your screen telling you where to send a text message, that you'll help support our work. Because please God, this pandemic will be behind us. And the moment this is behind us, we're not a Zoom organization anymore. Maybe we'll continue to do these classes. It's very nice, but that's not all we are. We're actually a live, active organization. While COVID is taking place, we're building the very first Sephardic museum in the old city of Jerusalem. I'll be speaking a little bit more about that in some of the future lectures. I've already given a little bit of a preview of it in some past, when the old city spoke Ladino, when Jerusalem spoke Ladino, etc., when the Torah spoke Ladino. We are telling the Sephardic story of the old city of Jerusalem in one of the most prominent historic Sephardic buildings. We have celebrities like Yoram Gaon, Bet Yosef. Some of the most prominent individuals in Israel are behind this, are helping us with this. We have a professional curator, we have research scholars, we have a professional museum company that have built exhibits in all of the major museums in Israel. This is not a moms and pops program that we're doing. This is going to be a professional museum with real exhibits for all tourists to come, because we hope and pray, we know this pandemic will be behind us, and then we're back to being a real live organization, taking groups of young people to Israel, taking families, young adults, our rabbis that come to our programs every summer. They'll also be speaking in tribute videos in 2 weeks. So this is my commercial to you. Mark your calendars, 2 weeks, watch your emails so that you could register. It's not going to be a long program. It'll be, probably maybe about an hour, the whole thing, including music, Ladino songs, Hebrew songs, Sephardic music. Ethan Marcus, who helps us out so much and co-sponsors us with the Sephardic Brotherhood, these lectures, and it's helps run it and put it on Facebook and all that. I always thank him. He asked me tonight, just before he let all of you in to the Zoom, because I advertised that we're going to be talking about Sephardic approaches to Hanukkah. So he asked me if I'm going to be singing Ocho Candelicas, which is, the 8 candle song, the famous Ladino song. So I said, for that, you've got the wrong Buskila. That's not my field. She lives in New York. Her name is Shira, which means song. We appropriately named her because she's a professional singer. So if you want to hear Ocho Candelicas or some other Ladino or Sephardic or Hebrew music, log in 2 weeks. And please God, you'll hear Shira, and you'll hear maybe some other singers as well. We have some great, great things in the work. The only un-Sephardic part of this program in 2 weeks, the really non-Sephardic, I would say it's a non-Jewish part of the program, but it's certainly a non-Sephardic part of the program, is that we're not serving any food. I mean, that's really that's against our character, because I have to tell you, when we have the Sephardic Film Festival at Paramount, so we spend some time on the program, who we're going to honor, the films that we're going to choose, the film that we're going to show that night, the films that we're going to show during the week. We spend some time on those things. We spend a lot of time discussing what kind of food we're going to have, what kind of hors d'oeuvres, what kind of cocktails, should we do it this way or that way, the catering. This is a very, very important part of our evening, and it's absolutely stunning. It's one of the most beautiful evenings of any event. I mean, this is not the rubber chicken dinner at the Beverly Hilton Hotel or the Century Plaza Hotel. This is an elegant red carpet event with all the bells and whistles, and we usually do it sometime in November, so they already have the Christmas lights up. So it's gorgeous, absolutely stunning. You can go on our website, SephardiceducationalCenter.org, and you could see photographs from the past events. It's out. So yes, I see somebody saying it's bring your own bimuelos. Yes, you're going to have to bring your own bimuelos at night. Trust me. Otherwise, every year Chanukah in my home, I have over 100 people. I have a Hanukkah party, in and out, people coming in. We've got bimuelos going and levivot, latkes, whatever you want. This is something that I'm going to seriously miss this year of doing, with great respect that we said Pesach and this and that. Hanukkah is a holiday that I'm going to really miss, having people around me and parties and light and lighting up my home with, over sometimes 40 or 50 Chanukiyot all over the place. It's for sure a violation of the LA Fire Department. It's a fire hazard, but it's just so beautiful. So join us in 2 weeks. But in the meanwhile, let's start a little bit talking about Chanukah tonight. And I want to talk first a little bit in general. It's important in order to understand the presentation I'm going to make, to talk a little bit about the background of the story of Hanukkah. And I want to preface by saying I'm not here to give a historical lecture about Hanukkah, meaning the Book of Maccabees and the true history behind Hanukkah versus the presentation in the Talmud. I'm not here tonight to, we say in Hebrew, I'm not here to deal in facts. I'm here to deal with in ideas. Because as we've studied, when we looked at the Kabbalistic tradition, they were not historians. They were not looking for facts. They weren't searching archaeology and trying to find proof for the story. They were masters of ideas. And one of the great contributions of the Sephardic world in general to the Jewish world, I would say to the world at large, is to bring ideas. People like Maimonides, people like Nachmanides, very different types of thinkers. Maimonides, the philosopher, Nachmanides, the Kabbalist. What do they share in common? Ideas. They opened up our minds to thinking and to looking at some of the ideas that we had written in our sources, in our texts, in our tradition, in the Bible, in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, and they repackaged it with brand new vision, brand new ideas. This continuity of interpretation, of explanation, lasted for centuries and is one of the hallmarks of the Jewish tradition. It's one of the hallmarks of the Sephardic Kabbalistic tradition, which I will eventually get to tonight. But let's begin with the story of Chanukah. The story of Chanukah, as told, the official story of Chanukah that the Jewish tradition has gone with for the last 2,000 plus years, is not the story that some of you may be thinking, well, I read in the book of Maccabees the story. That's not the story we've gone with. The story of Chanukah that we've gone with in terms of how we celebrate Chanukah, how we actualize the celebration, is a story recorded in the Talmud. And where in the Talmud is it recorded? There is actually no tractate, there's no volume that deals with Chanukah. There is a volume that deals with Purim, Masechet Megillah. There's a volume of the Talmud that deals with Rosh Hashanah, with Yom Kippur, with Sukkot, right? But there is no tractate of the Talmud that deals with Chanukah. So where is Chanukah discussed? Very interesting. It's discussed in the Talmud in Tractate Shabbat, Masechet Shabbat. What in the world do Chanukah and Shabbat share in common? The answer is we go to chapter 2 of the Talmud of Tractate Shabbat, Masechet Shabbat. There's actually the opening Mishnah, the opening section of the Mishnah, of the rabbinic teachings that the Talmud expounded upon, is actually a chapter of Mishnah that we read every Friday night. In many traditions, it's the custom to read this chapter of Mishnah every Friday night during Kabbalat Shabbat. Remember, we discussed, for those who took the Kabbalah and mysticism classes, we discussed the origins of Kabbalat Shabbat, where that comes from, in Tzfat, the 16th century, and so on. What texts were they reading? One of the texts that's read, and it continues to be part of the prayer book, is the beginning of Perek Bameh Madlikin, the chapter, what are the appropriate wicks and oils to use to kindle Shabbat lights. So I don't want to get into the detail of that, but in that Talmudic chapter, chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbat, Masechet Shabbat, we suddenly find the rabbis discussing the laws and the story of Chanukah. Why would they be discussing that? Because how did the Talmud work? Remember that the Talmud was not a written text. The Talmud is now a written record of conversations and discussions that took place in the Bet Midrash, in the house of learning, the house of study. So here the rabbis were having a discussion about what wicks and oils are appropriate to use. What are the best wicks and oils to use to light Shabbat lights? How long should they last? Because why were you lighting candles on Shabbat or lights, right? You have to keep in mind that 2,000 years ago, the Shabbat candles that they were lighting were not the Shabbat candles that they're putting on their table, that you're putting on your table. But in the meanwhile, you're also going to have electricity and lights. They didn't have that. The Shabbat lights were their lights, right? And so therefore, there was a long discussion about saying, so that you will not eat in the dark on Friday night, mipnei shalom bayit, so that you have peace in your home, because darkness is unsettling, which is, by the way, a theme that we'll touch upon a little bit later in this discussion regarding Chanukah. The whole feeling of darkness is unsettling. It's not a peaceful feeling to be sitting in the dark, a power outage. We feel completely helpless. It's unsettling. And so the rabbis wanted to make sure that the wicks and oils that you use for your Shabbat lights, not now, because now it's irrelevant because we have lights in our homes. Now there's nothing more than simply symbolic, although they have new meaning, the Shabbat lights, but none of us eat or live by our Shabbat candlesticks. We have electricity in our homes and we set our lights and we can have the most beautiful halogen or whatever lights we're using. But back then, this is what they were using. So the rabbinic tradition wanted to make sure by logic which wicks and oils are going to be pure, last the longest, and the flame will stay, and so on. So here they are engaged for a few pages worth of discussion in this whole talk about wicks and oils. Somebody popped into their mind and they said, speaking of wicks and oils, we also have another time when we use wicks and oils. It's called Chanukah. And there, for the very first time, for about 3 pages in the Talmud, it's like a mini tractate by itself, 3 pages worth, of the discussions of everything about the laws of Chanukah, which blessings you recite, where you place the Chanukiah, the menorah, where you place the lights, how you light, what kind of oil you could use, is it the same as the Shabbat ones or different, et cetera, et cetera. There's that discussion. Within that discussion, okay, we find a couple of key points that I want to focus on now, the Talmudic points that will carry us into a fantastic discussion from the Kabbalists regarding Chanukah. The first and important piece is how we are supposed to light the Chanukiah, right? And there is, of course, a very famous dispute between Shammai and Hillel, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, the 2 famous rabbis that dispute what is the appropriate way of lighting the candelabra, the lights, right? Do you light one light only? That's an opinion. You light one light per evening. Do you light one light per household? One light per member of the house? There's a whole discussion and says, how do you light the Chanukah lights? How do you do this? So one opinion says, before Shammai and Hillel, ner Chanukah, ner ish uveto, meaning on the first night, an individual lights a flame for the home. That's what you do the first night. And according to that opinion, on the 4th night, you also light one. On the 8th night, you also light one. There was no menorah like you're used to. They were talking about lights, okay? Then there's another opinion that said, those who want to do it more beautifully, hamehadrin, right? Those who want to do it nicer, hidur, ner lekol echad vechad, 1 candle per member of the household. So that means if there's 4 people in my house, on the first night, I light 4 candles. And on the 5th night, also 4. And on the 8th night, 4. Meaning, is the candle a reflection of the home or how many people live in the home? Meaning the lights that are displayed. Then comes Shammai and Hillel and said, Mahadrin min hamedrin, the one who want to do it most beautifully, you light 1 each night, right? But Shammai and Hillel had a different understanding. They said we should light it corresponding to days. Now, does it mean how many days still to come, or how many days are we subtracting, days that have gone by already? Bottom line, Shammai said on the first night, you light 8 and you decrease, right? 7, 6, 5, 4, you're down to 1 on the 8th night. Hillel said on the first night 1, and we increase, and we come to 8, right? The answer given there was Ma'alin bekodesh. We always want to ascend in holiness, in kedusha. Each light is considered sacred. We actually say so. Hanelot halalu kodesh hem, ve'en lanu reshut lishtamesh bahem, ela lirotam bilvad. These candles, these lights, these flames are sacred. We have no right to make use of them. They're there to be displayed. What is the key difference between the Chanukah lights and the Shabbat lights that are being discussed in the chapter in the Talmud? Shabbat lights are for light. Shabbat lights are meant to give light. Okay? In order to understand what that means, remember I said, today none of us live under the premise we can have the most beautiful candelabras that our grandparents gave us, and we display in them beautiful candles, or we use oil, whatever olive oil you want to use, candle oil, and they're beautiful on your table. But none of us live by that. We have lights on that we set, and we say we're going to have Shabbat dinner to the lights in our home, in our living room, in our dining room. According to certain rabbis, according to certain halachic rabbis, when you make the bracha, the hadlik ner shel Shabbat, to light the Shabbat lamps, you should have in mind not only the traditional candles that you're lighting, but also the light in your home that you're leaving, because those are your real ner shel Shabbat. That's what you're making sure you hope will stay on, and there won't be a power outage, and you'll live in shalom bayit, in the peace of your home. So what's the difference is that for Hanukkah, they're not about light that we're allowed to use. We're not allowed to use that, okay? For example, okay, a lot of people have a misunderstanding about that 9th candle that appears on our Hanukkah candelabra, the one that we call the shamash, right? A lot of people think that the reason for the shamash, right, I'm just holding one, would be a candle to light the other candles. That can't make sense for the simple reason that if you don't have to imagine what it was like. If today you're using olive oil, if you have a candelabra, a Hanukkah of oil, you can't take the wick of the shamash of the oil and use it to light the others, right? You're going to have a lighter, a match or something, and you're going to light whatever, how many you're lighting that night, 4, 5, 8, whatever it is. And then you're also going to light the shamash. For what? What's the purpose? The answer is very simple. It's a fantastic legal fiction that the rabbinic tradition came up with. They said, since the Chanukah lights, candles, oils, whatever we're using, are not meant to be used. They're not like the Shabbat lights that are supposed to bring light into my home, physical light. They're supposed to represent a miracle, a story, spiritual light, if you will. They have a deeper representation than simply the Shabbat candles, which originally were to bring light in my home so that I will not eat in the dark on Friday night. I will not live or dwell in darkness Friday night. We're not allowed to read by the Hanukkah candles. Now, let's say I do, right? In order to make sure, okay, I have the candelabra with 8, and it looks gorgeous and beautiful, and I'm sitting right by it, and I have my comfortable reading chair, and I open a book. If I open the book and I actually read to that light, I'm not supposed to. I just said so earlier. These lights are holy. We have no right, we're not allowed to make use of them. We're only supposed to see them. You're only supposed to demonstrate them and place them in a place. And we have an idea. There's no halacha, there's no law of taking your Shabbat candles and displaying them in the window for everybody to see. Okay, well, I mean, we all remember the scene in Fiddler on the Roof when we see the lights shining in each place. We don't have to do that. Okay, it was a nice a visual effect for the movie, but we don't have to do that. You can put them anywhere. They don't have to be on your table. They could be on the side somewhere. As long as you lit them, made the bracha, they could be sitting in the corner, make sure it's irrelevant. But in the Talmud that I'm talking about here, there are debates and discussions about where you're supposed to display the Chanukiah, where you're supposed to display the Chanukah light. Why? Because there is an element of what we call lefalsem et hanes, in Aramaic, pirsuma denisa, to publicize the miracle. These candles, these lights, these lamps tell a story. They tell a story about a miracle, about times. Bayamim ahem bazman hazeh. We make a blessing. Shasan nisim la'avotenu bayamim ahem bazman hazeh. You made miracles for our ancestors during those days at that period of time. These candles and lights represent miracle. As a result, I'm not allowed to use them. So why did we put the shamash? Because if I'm standing, this is the great Talmudic logic, if I'm sitting in my chair and I have 8, and wow, there's a lot of light, beautiful, I want to open the book, I want to read, I'm not allowed to. But say I do, lest I might, because I see it's such beautiful light, I actually want to use it, right? If I'm reading, I'm not actually reading from those 8. I'm only using that one. That's the shamash. It's there to make sure that in the event that I might be using and benefiting from that light, I'm only benefiting from one, not the other 8 or 7 or 5 or whatever night it is. That's the shamash. Only when we went from lighting oil lamps to candles did the shamash take on the appearance of I'm using this to light the others. But that's not its original purpose, right? Because when you're using oil, you can't take the oil and use it to light the other oils. You light it all in the same way with a match, a lighter, whatever you're using. Okay, so all of these ideas point to what? That the Hanukkah candles or lights or lamps are sacred, are holy. They tell a story, they represent something. As a matter of fact, the Talmud tells us that story. The Talmud, the famous story of Hanukkah, appears in the Gemara, Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud, and it asks a question. The rabbis ask the question and they say, my Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? What is this holiday, right? We want to know what happened on this holiday, right? Rashi, the commentator, immediately has a very beautiful, deep insight. Rashi says the following thing. My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah? What does that mean? He says, not what is the holiday, what is the story, what is the meaning? He wants to know one thing only. Al eze nes kavuha. What miracle took place in order to establish this holiday? That sets the ground rules immediately. It says, this holiday has behind it, wrapped around it, something miraculous. There's a deeper story. There is a message to this holiday. And I have to tell you, by the way, before I continue with the Talmud, if there's any holiday I feel we really need during this period of time in our lives, it's Hanukkah. Because if you think about the themes of Hanukkah, they're all about uplifting us, especially during our world going through such difficulty. It seems like the world is kind of a dark place right now. We're surrounded by pestilence and plague and death tolls every day and rising numbers and all sorts of horror stories that we read and hear and talk about, and it's frightening, right? It seems kind of dark. It's a dark month. That's always this month of November, December, the month of Kislev, just the way the world is, and that's the solar system and the way it's set up. These are short days, dark days. There's a lot more darkness physically prevailing in during these periods of time than there is light. But also emotionally, a lot of people are going through depression, through difficult times. And when we look at Chanukah, what are the messages of Chanukah? Heroism and courage. Think about our healthcare workers and professionals who are on the front lines of COVID every day, dealing day in and day out with some of the most difficult situations, far beyond anything we know on the news. When I talk to doctors that I know and nurses and healthcare professionals, the news tells us nothing compared to what one conversation with any of them, and you'll really understand the magnitude of what's going on. And they're not coming from any political angle of this and that. They're simply people that are trying to tend to lives and save lives. They're the Maccabees of this period. They're the heroes that have heroism and courage. They're the people that we should look up to and give thanks to for what they're doing. When we talk about miracles, they're trying to miraculously work. Hanukkah is a holiday of miracles. Hanukkah is also Chag HaUrim. It's a festival of light. The very first person to actually name Hanukkah the festival of light was Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian of the Second Temple period. He said this festival is called light, phota in Greek, right? He gave it that name and said this is the festival of light. So here we have a holiday that's all about these ideas: miracles, light, courage, heroism. And it's told in the Talmud in 2-3 lines. They ask the question, my Chanukah, what is Chanukah? And Rashi says, Al eze nes kavuha. And then it continues. It says, the Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis teach us, they tell us the story. On the 25th of Kislev, right, the beginning of the 25th day of Kislev at night, the day starts at night in the Jewish calendar, towards the end of this month of Kislev, the 25th, right, we have 8 days of Chanukah, upon which it is prohibited to give a eulogy and to fast. No eulogies and no fasting during the 8 days of Hanukkah. Why? What happened? They tell the story. When the Greeks, Antiochus, the Greek Empire, when they came into the temple, they defiled all of the oils in the temple. The oil was a very, very important part of the temple because on a day-to-day basis, there was something that burnt called the Ner Tamid, the eternal lamp and flame. And of course, there was the very big, beautiful menorah, not the 8-branched candelabra for Hanukkah, but the 7-branched menorah that we learn about in the Torah. And what oil was used? The Torah tells us, how do we kindle those flames? Shemen zayit, olive oil, not any oil, right? The Talmud about Shabbat, it says, what oils can you use? When it comes to Hanukkah, there's no multiplicity of what oils. It's supposed to be olive oil because the miracle that we all know that I'm about to discuss took place with olive oil, shemen zayit. That makes it the preferred oil to use for kindling the Hanukkah lights. So we know the Talmud continues and says, when the Greeks came in, they defiled all of the oils in the temple. And when the house of the Hasmoneans, Malchut Bet Hashmonai, when the Hasmoneans, otherwise known in their nickname, the Maccabees, when they came in and defeated the Greeks, right? They checked. What was the first thing they looked for? When they were able to defeat in a military victory, they defeated the Greeks and they came in and retook control of the temple. The temple was not destroyed like on Tisha B'Av when we mourn the destruction of the temple. The temple was not destroyed during the 3 years that the Greeks occupied the temple in Jerusalem during the whole Maccabean war against the Greeks. The 25th of Kislev, they were able to liberate the temple, and then they had to purify it. Why? Because the Greeks had defiled the temple. They brought in, they took the altar, the Mizbeach, and they brought in pig and sacrificed and all sorts of idol worship that didn't belong in the Jewish temple in the house of God. So the Greeks defiled it, and the Maccabees' job, after they militarily took over the temple, took back control of the Bet HaMikdash, of the temple, they had to clean it all out, purify it, build a new altar, right? Which is why this holiday actually is called Chanukat HaMizbeach. That's the full name of the holiday, the dedication of the altar. And they retook control. And then they looked and said, I wonder if there's any oil left now that we've cleaned. Is there any oil left? Is there a remnant of the oil from 3 years ago? Can we find anything that's pure? And they looked and they only found one small jug of oil that had the seal and stamp of the Kohen Gadol. Each little jug of oil had to be sealed and certified that it met the approval of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest, for use in the temple. This was the sanctity, the kashrut of the oil, if you will, not for dietary purposes, but for the purposes of kindling the flames. So the story in the Talmud tells us that the Maccabees searched after cleaning everything out and rebuilding the altar, and they found one jug. And it says the following thing: there was only enough to last one day. Na'asabones, a miracle took place. Rashi asked the question, what's the miracle of Hanukkah? Na'asabones, vidliku mimenu shmona yamim. And they were able to light from it for 8 days. The Shana Acheret, the following year, Kav'um, they turned it into a permanent holiday till today. This is the story of Hanukkah. Okay. Now, if you follow the story carefully, there's a little bit of a glitch in the story. And the first to point this out is somebody who we spent a lot of time discussing and learning about when we studied Kabbalah. We spoke about somebody named Yosef Karo. Yosef Karo is one of those brilliant men to walk the face of planet Earth. He was a creative, brilliant thinker, And he is certainly amongst the top 5 most influential Jews to ever walk the face of the earth. As you remember, Yosef Caro was born in Spain in 1488. In 1492, and he was all of 4 years old, his family, together with another 350,000 Spanish Jews, were expelled from Spain, 1492. From there, he went to Constantinople. He became a very famous rabbi. He was in Salonika in Greece, and ultimately, he moved to Tzfat, the city of Tzfat, Safed, and Eretz Israel. Remember, we studied the whole story about the fact that Yosef Caro had a magid, had a voice, the Shekhinah. He was a mystic and a halachist, and he blended the worlds of mysticism and halacha into some of the most influential books that influenced all of Judaism for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years till today. And that is the book of the Shulchan Aruch, but the first book that he wrote, which was an incredibly brilliant, deep analysis of halacha, is known as the Bet Yosef. The Bet Yosef poses a question. Rav Yosef Caro, the great Kabbalist, asked the following question. He says, and I'm going to read and translate. It says, Ve'ika lemedak. We have to read the story carefully. The rabbis tell us that Chanukah is an 8-day festival because we're celebrating an 8-day festival, 8 days of miracle, because we lit a jug of oil for which there was enough for 1 day, and it lasted 8 days. So he asks the question, and this is a famous question, by the way, that gave birth to hundreds and hundreds of answers. If I gave you every answer that was provided to this question, I told you that 2 weeks from tonight, we're having SEC candlelighting for Chanukah. If I started to give you every answer that was given to this question, we'd be here till the 15th at 5 p.m. Pacific time, just in time to start our program. Hundreds and hundreds of answers were given to this brilliant, insightful question by the Bet Yosef. Remember, he was not from the Talmudic period. Hundreds of years later, he suddenly asks the question. This is already, Jews are celebrating Chanukah. They're lighting it 8 nights. There's all the halachot, the laws of how, where to place it, and so on. So then comes the Bet Yosef and asks a question. Ika lemedak. He says, let's specify. Let's point out a little nuance in the text. Lama kavu shmona yamin. Why is Chanukah 8 days? Dekevan the shemen shebapach hayabo kedei ladlik laila chat. Since there was enough oil in the jug to last 1 night, the miracle was only 7, not 8. Why do we have Hanukkah for 8 days? If we're celebrating a miracle, like Rashi asked the question, what's the miracle of Hanukkah? 7 nights, meaning there was enough for 1 night. First night was not a miracle. It's supposed to happen that way. When they lit it before and it lasted a night, they didn't make it a holiday. Why are we doing that now? Hanukkah should only be 7 days, not 8. That's the answer. And so hundreds and hundreds of people weighed in on this question, including some of the most brilliant mystical minds who wanted to approach it from different angles. I'll throw out some of the answers that were given, but I want to focus on one tonight, as the core of my discussion. We received, there are answers that include, we're celebrating the military victory. We're celebrating the fact that we even found the military victory itself was a miracle. Why? Because in the Al Hanisim paragraph that we recite during the liturgy, during the Amidah, Birkat Hamazon, there's a paragraph that we recite that tells the story. We say, you, God, placed the many in the hands of the few, right? The mighty in the hands of the weak, etc. So that's a miracle, right? We were outnumbered, right? As a result, that the military victory was a miracle. That's what we're celebrating on day 1. And then the other 7 days are because the oil continued to last. There are others who have said the very fact that we found that there was this one jug that lasted through 3 years of ravaging and defiling and destroying the temple, and somehow one jug went unbroken, untampered with, and stayed there in its pure, pristine form for 3 years, and after we cleansed everything, we were able to find it. That's also a miracle, etc., etc. They've given answers that some of them are far-fetched, some of them are logical. How long did it take to press the oil? They walked for 4 days and walked back. That's why it's 8 days. They rationed the oil, and there really should have been enough to only burn. They took what was enough for 1 night and they rationed it into several different small portions. And what should have each burnt only 1/8, actually each small portion lasted all night and 8 nights. Lots of answers. I want to focus on one, given by one of the most brilliant, insightful Kabbalists. His name was Rabbi Avraham Azulai. The Azulai family was one of the most prominent Kabbalistic families. Rabbi Avraham Azulai, there's other Kabbalists, the Chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai. The majority of these Kabbalists came from Morocco. And indeed, Rabbi Avraham Azulai was born in the year 1599 in the city of Fez, Morocco. He eventually made his way to Eretz Israel, to the Holy Land, and he settled in Ir Ha'avot ve'Ha'imahot, the city of our patriarchs and matriarchs, the city of Hebron. And there he lived until the year 1619. In 1619, you know what happened in the world and in the land of Israel? COVID-19, COVID-16-19. There was a plague. And that plague drove him out of Hebron. How appropriate I felt, to use his commentary because of his story. During the COVID-19 of 1619, when Rabbi Avraham Azulai had to leave the city of Hebron, where did he go and settle? The geopolitical map was a little bit different back then in the year 1619. So as strange as it's going to sound to you, there was once a very, very prominent Jewish community and a very prominent Kabbalistic circle of scholars in a place called Gaza. Yes, Gaza City in the Gaza Strip, right? Gaza, right? There were famous Kabbalists that lived in Gaza. And Rabbi Avraham Azulai moved to Gaza from Hebron because of the COVID-19 of 1619. He left and went to the city of Gaza. And there he composed a very, very beautiful book called Sefer Chesed LeAvraham. What does Chesed LeAvraham mean? Chesed means loving kindness to Abraham. Why did he name that book Chesed LeAvraham? Because he felt that God had saved him from the plague. God was acted to him in loving kindness, in mercy, by having saved him from the plague that was taking place in the area of Hebron, and brought him to Gaza in safety, where there he was able to write a very, very beautiful discussion about Torah through the lenses of mysticism. And he focuses, when it comes to Kushiat Bet Yosef, the question of the Bet Yosef, on why Chanukah should be only 7 nights, what happened the first day, what's the extra day that we're celebrating. He chooses to look at it through the lens of a verse from the Book of Proverbs. And I want to focus on that and to discuss what he has to say. There's a very, very beautiful pasuk. The Book of Proverbs in general is one of the most beautiful books in all of human literature. Familiarize yourselves with it because it's an absolute masterpiece and classic attributed to Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. There is a verse in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 23, that says the following: Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or v'derech chaim tochechot musar. Going to translate. For the commandments, the mitzvot, are like a lamp, ner, and the teachings of the Torah are light, and these instruct us for morality and a way of life. Ner and mitzvah and Torah or. The candle, the light, the lamp is like the mitzvot, and the Torah is like light. And Rabbi Avraham Azulai focuses on a beautiful teaching and says, what really happened on the holiday of Hanukkah? It's not enough, he says. I know that he says, Kushiat Bet Yosef, the question of the Bet Yosef is, why was there enough only for one night, and since there was, we should only be celebrating 7 nights. He says, let's look deeper into that question, because it's not why 7 nights versus 8 nights. It's really, what's the miracle of Hanukkah? Is the miracle of Hanukkah really only about oil lasting 7 or 8 days? Is that really what we're celebrating? Is that what we're annually remembering? That the oil lasted 7 or 8 days, and on that reason alone, that's why we established the holiday? He says, no, there's much more to it. He says, he reads the verse from the Book of Proverbs. It says, Ki ner mitzvah. When you hear ner, what does that bring to mind? The blessing that we make when we light the Chanukah candles. The hadlik ner. Ner can mean today candle, but it means lamp. The Book of Proverbs compares lamps, candles, right? Ner mitzvah. Ner is like the mitzvot, the commandments of Judaism. And the Torah in general is light. Ner mitzvah v'torah or. Rabbi Avraham Azulai says, one of the most beautiful teachings that I've heard. He says, this is the verse that we have to actually be thinking about when we're lighting the Hanukkah candles, not only on the first night, all 8 nights. Because he says, essentially, what was under threat? Not oil, not a jug of oil. What was under threat was Judaism itself. You know, we talk about the Holocaust. We talk about the destruction of the temple. We talk about the expulsion from Spain. This was an almost Holocaust. This was an almost destruction of the temple. Came very close to it. This was a near expulsion. But in this case, what happened is the authorities overtook the land of Israel, the Jewish people's homeland, and the Jewish people's way of life was the way of life of tradition, of the Torah, of teachings, of the tradition of their ancestors, dating back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here came the Greeks with a brand new way of life. Change your way of dress, change your language, change your names, change your religious way of life. And when push came to shove, we're going to persecute. Dare you study Torah? Dare you read the Torah? Dare you read your traditions? Dare you observe Shabbat and the laws of Kashrut? Dare you observe the commandment of Brit Milah, of circumcising your children, your sons, on the 8th day? All of those were outlawed for 3 years. We were under complete persecution. And so he says, to answer Kushiat Bet Yosef, the question of Yosef Karo, what is the miracle that we're celebrating on the first day? But he says, not only on the first day, on all 8 days, what are we celebrating? The fact that the Torah and the mitzvot were saved. Because without them, we would have been completely annihilated as a people. Judaism would not have survived. Had the Greeks won, had their victory been complete, the light of the mitzvot would have been extinguished. The lamp of the mitzvot would have been extinguished. And the light of the Torah would have been completely darkened. And so he says, this is a holiday that indeed there is a triumph of light over darkness. And what is light in the world? From the Jewish perspective, the Torah and the mitzvot. Because he says, look at the verse that continues. What does it say? Ki ner mitzvah v'torah or v'derech chayim v'tochechot musar. He says, what is that lamp called the mitzvot? What is that light called the Torah? It is a collection of ethical instructions that teach us derech chayim, a way of life. They are the guidebook to an illuminating path that's not only about preserving our ancestors' traditions, but it's about teaching our children and the next generation a beautiful system of morals and ethics and values and how to behave. This is the door of the Torah. Not only to do so because of my past, but to hand that over to the next generation. So indeed, when we're lighting the Chanukah lamps, we're not only talking about the past, we're only talking about what happened. We now have the opportunity to affirm as Jews that we bring light into the world, that we are indeed a light unto the nations. And this holiday, Rabbi Avraham Azulai says, that's the celebration. That's the miracle. One of the most beautiful insights that I've heard is to say ner mitzvah v'torah or. When we think about what happened on Chanukah, says this is what happened. Judaism and the Torah were under threat. So with all due respect to saying, let's find a reason for day one because only days 2 through 7 are miraculous. He says, no, it's true. He says, Bet Yosef asked a beautiful question, a very important question, right? Ika lemedak. He says, I want to know the detail, the specifics about where the Torah, where is the miracle on day one? And so Rabbi Avraham Azulai says, what was the miracle on day one? The miracle on day one was the fact that we were able to bring light into the world, not the light of the Chanukiah, of the menorah, not the light of the olive oil. What that light represents. The Torah is light. The mitzvot are a lamp. And these are our guides and instructions. And the commentaries actually on that very verse, he's strengthened by the beautiful commentary of Rashi, who lived earlier than him, who says, do you know what this verse is talking about? When it talks about ner mitzvah v'torah or, he says, ner mitzvah and Torah or, Rashi says, back to Rashi again, Rashi says, ner mitzvah and Torah or are actually the mitzvot of kabed et avicha v'et imecha. Respect your mother and father, respect your parents. Ner mitzvah and Torah or, the lamp of the mitzvot and the Torah and the light of Torah. Rashi says the mitzvot represent avicha, your father, and the Torah represents your mother. Yesterday, I unfortunately had to officiate at a funeral of a very, very beautiful woman who died at a young age. She was maybe in her early 60s, somebody that I had the privilege of being the rabbi for her children's bar and bat mitzvah when I was the rabbi of a Sephardic synagogue. And I also even celebrated their chuppot, their weddings. I was the officiant. I saw these kids grow up, and I had the privilege of being the rabbi under the chuppah for both of her children. And she died of cancer at a young age. And I taught there during her, it was a small gathering, maybe 20 some people, outdoors, all the masks, everything, not the same as the type of funerals we're accustomed to, but these are the times we're living in. And there I spoke about her, and I said, during the month of Chanukah, we think about light and we think about Torah. I had this teaching in mind. What I said is very interesting. If you look at the same book of Proverbs, in the very beginning, he says, the book of King Solomon says, Shma b'ni musar avicha, listen, my child, my son, to the ethics and teachings of your father. Ve'al titosh torat imecha, and never withdraw, never leave the Torah of your mother. And I said, it's interesting. When we hear the word Torah, musar means advice, ethics. Torah means, I don't know. What does it mean? To most of us, when we have a traditional understanding of the word Torah, we'll say, didn't King Solomon get it wrong? Is it usually the opposite? It's the mother that gives good advice, and the father, it's his job to teach Torah. It's a man's world, right? It's in Judaism, old school traditional Judaism. The man teaches Torah. The mother gives good advice, ethic, moral voice. King Solomon, 3,000 years ago in the Book of Proverbs, said the opposite. He said, why? Because the word Torah is much more than a book. Torah is a way of life. Torah means instruction. So it's not only about what you read in a book. It's not only the scroll that you see in synagogue on Shabbat or holidays, but it's actually the way of life, the teachings. And there King Solomon says, listen to good advice from your father. And don't ever abandon the Torah of your mother. It's fantastic. It's a very, very deep insight about Torah and the breadth of what Torah really means. That it's actually a woman, not a man, who can give over Torah. Not only the Torah of the book, which women, of course, can and certainly have and continue to do so in beautiful and strength in numbers. I'm proud to say, I always look to enhance my education, and I look online to see, for all the classes that I teach, I also like to learn. And I just today registered for a class once a week being taught in my alma mater in New York, Yeshiva University, in their graduate school. A brilliant class on biblical exegesis, on biblical commentaries from the 19th and 20th century. And it's being taught by a brilliant woman who teaches at Stern College of Yeshiva University, the Women's College, and the Graduate School. It's amazing. Today we just take that for granted. When you stop and think about what would that have looked like 100 years ago, right? The fact that, not only that I could register online, that it's going to be on Zoom, but it's a woman, an Orthodox woman who's a scholar, who has a PhD from NYU and is a brilliant, learned scholar, who has written many books on biblical interpretation and commentaries. She's going to be teaching that class to men and women, graduate students. I'm just going to be an auditor to listen and to learn more from a brilliant woman. But here, King Solomon is saying there's something deeper than just the Torah of the book. There's the Torah of the way of life. When I come back to Hanukkah and the story of Hanukkah, they say, Rashi says, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or, the light is, the mitzvot are light, and the Torah, the mitzvot are like a lamp, and the Torah is like a light, right? What does he mean? He says it's the Avicha ve'imecha, your father and mother. And there he says, because the father maybe teaches you mitzvot, and again, come back to the same idea. And the mother teaches Torah, right? The father teaches the technical side, mitzvot. How do you keep kosher? How do you put on tefillin? How do you keep Shabbat? But who teaches Torah? Respect, honor your father and your mother. Torat imecha, the Torah of your mother. The mother is the teacher of Torah, according to this beautiful book. And so Rabbi Avraham Azulai says, why is that important what Rashi says vis-a-vis Chanukah? Because when we're respecting the will of our parents, when we're respecting the mitzvot and the Torah that they taught us, it means Judaism is alive, and we have the privilege of transmitting that to the next generation. And he says, that's the miracle of Hanukkah. It's a Kabbalist's insight to say, don't simply look at the technicality of the story. Don't look at the detail of how much oil there was for a day or 8 days. The entire mitzvah, the entire narrative and story of Hanukkah is due to the fact that the world of Torah and mitzvot were saved and became, again, a way of life. Rabbi Avraham Azulai or Rashi would not have existed, and we would not be having this conversation were it not for the victory of Hanukkah. And Rabbi Avraham Azulai says that victory was not only a victory to defeat the Greeks and to capture the temple and to find a little jug of oil that had enough for 1 day and it lasted miraculously for 8 days. He says, when we pronounce the blessing, Sha'asa nisim la'avotenu, who made miracles for our ancestors, let's not minimize it to a jug of oil. That's not what we're celebrating. It's only a symbol of something much deeper that we're celebrating. Every day when we study Torah, every day when we observe the ethics and morals and values and traditions and mitzvot of the Torah, every single day we're bringing light into the world. Every day we're lighting the lamps of Hanukkah when we teach our children how to say the Shema, when we teach our communities how to observe Shabbat, how to come together, how to pray, how to observe the traditions. This is one of the masterpieces of Sephardic thinking that comes from that was born out of the way the Kabbalists taught us to think on a wider level. One of the hallmarks of Kabbalistic teaching, Rabbi Avraham Azulai also wrote a commentary on the Zohar, on the classic book that we talked about. Commentary on the Zohar he wrote in Hebron, but then he left Hebron because of a pandemic that took place in the year 1619. And he left and went to Gaza. And there he wrote this book. And there he had on his mind death, destruction, darkness. And he said, look where I am. I was saved from a pandemic. And I'm sitting now not in the home where I came to live in, Hebron. Now I'm in the south in Gaza, and a place, yes, where there were Kabbalists, but it's not Hebron. It's not the holy city of the matriarchs and patriarchs, Marat HaMachpelah, but I'm alive and I give thanks. That's a miracle. And when I look at Hanukkah, the story of Hanukkah itself is miraculous because the Torah was saved, because the mitzvot were saved. And that is something indeed that we should celebrate. It's one of the most beautiful messages. And I could say that I think it's important for all of us to think about these teachings. Sephardic or Ashkenazi, we have to understand one thing. We share one thing in common: the desire to keep traditions alive, the desire to keep these teachings alive. And we always have to ask ourselves the question, why? Why is it so important to us? Simply because we want to mimic the past, simply because my grandfather or great-grandfather in Morocco or in Rhodes or in Iraq or in Poland or wherever we come from, is that the only reason to teach this to our children? Maybe it's a nice way, but that doesn't last. There have to be meaning to it. When I look at mitzvot as a lamp and Torah as light, and I circle that back to Chanukah, and I say, when those Chanukah lights, numbers 1 through 8, every night when I light and I kindle a flame, and I say the blessing, it's a mitzvah, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, you sanctified us with your commandments, lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, to light the light of Chanukah. What kind of light am I bringing into the world? As we learned, it's not physical light. I'm not allowed to use that light. I'm not allowed to test it and say, how good is that light? Is it a better halogen lamp? Am I going to be able to read by it? Not allowed to do that. It's only there to be displayed. What are we displaying? That there was a supernatural miracle, that a small jug of oil lasted 8 days? That's cute to tell our children. But as they grow up, Rabbi Avraham Azulai reminds us that as they grow up and we'll continue to light Hanukkah candles, I'll tell you just one very moving thing, which I'll conclude with this on a personal note. When I think about all of this and I think about this teaching, my son Ilan now lives in Israel. He completed his IDF military service in the summer, and he made a decision not long after completing his IDF service that he wanted to stay in Israel and live in Israel. He lives in Jerusalem, the city of Yerushalayim. He became Israeli, made Aliyah formally. He received his Tudat Zehut, his ID card, and he lives in Israel. And for my wife and I, for Penny and I, this is, it's bittersweet in a way. It's sweet because we are so proud of him that he made this decision, not only to have served in a combat unit in the IDF, in the spirit of the Maccabees, but to also now make Israel, the Jewish homeland, his home. It's a little bit bitter for us because we miss him, because we're currently not only not living in Israel, but we can't even really travel to Israel. And so thankfully, Ilan was able to come and visit us recently. He was in New York for a week to visit his sister Shira. And then he came here a little over a week ago, and he was here for Thanksgiving. We gave a lot of thanks to have him with us. And he went back today, and it's been a little bit of a melancholy day for my wife and I, because we were so thrilled to have him around the house. We hadn't seen him in about a year. And he went back today to Israel, to his home. He had things to tend to there. His girlfriend is going to the army next month, and a lot of things. He needed to be back home. That's his home. Here he came to visit us, some friends, our dog. But Jerusalem is his home, and that's where he feels at home. And one of the most emotional moments for me while we were packing, it's Hanukkah, and Penny and I have a beautiful box of Chanukiot. I mean, we have every year collected over the last 27, 28 years, we've collected lots of Hanukkah menorahs. And we, like I said, when we light the house up, the miracle of the Buskila home is, if we want to answer the kushya of the Bet Yosef, the miracle of the Buskila home, if you're only celebrating 7 days, the miracle of the Buskila home is that the Buskila home never went up in flames, because of the amount of menorahs that we light, especially when we have a party on the 6th or 7th or 8th night, and we invite a lot of people and they each light a menorah. It is so gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful feelings in the world. And we have a lot of menorahs in this box. Some of them are displayed during the year. Others we put in a box and we take it out before Hanukkah, and we start taking out the ones that we want to light and putting them all over the place. And Penny and I, we said, Ilan, he lives in an apartment in Jerusalem. Do you want to take a menorah back? And he was looking through the box. We have a lot of really beautiful ones, Art Deco ones, modern ones, silver, this, that, whatever. And I don't know, when we sometimes say Ner Mitzvah V'Torah Or, and we say that the mitzvah of Chanukah is connected to respecting our parents, that deep connection that we have with the Torah and the mitzvot from generation to generation. Ilan went through the box. And again, like I said, we have so many different ones, beautiful ones with different images and fun things and so on. And he picked one. And he said, I want to take this one back. Is that okay? And I had tears because he picked the menorah that I grew up with. It was the menorah that his grandfather lit in my home growing up every night. When I said that, I said, it's incredible from generation to generation, how something, maybe there's some sort of a magnet, a connection there, that he was drawn to that one, the one that his grandfather, Papa, used to light. The same grandfather whose footsteps he followed in by serving in the IDF the way his grandfather served in the War of Independence. He saw a pile of menorahs and he sifted through them and he said, Dad, can I take this one back? And Penny wrapped it in bubble wrap, and it's on its way right now to Jerusalem, to Israel. And please God, next week on Chanukah, that lamp will be kindled, one that I grew up with here in Los Angeles, a menorah that was originally from Israel, that my father bought in Israel and brought home here to Los Angeles. And I grew up with that one. It's currently on an El Al flight, together with Ilan and all the others on the flight, on its way back to Israel, and it's going to be kindled in Jerusalem just a few minutes from where the miracle of Hanukkah took place. This is what Rabbi Avraham Azulai is talking about. Ner mitzvah v'Torah or, when Bet Yosef asks the question, why do we celebrate an 8th day when we only should have been celebrating 7? It's for these sorts of stories. Hanukkah is one of the most inspirational holidays that fills our hearts, our homes, and our world with light. It's not about physical light. It's not about turning the light on. It's about bringing light into the world, which is what the Jewish people have been doing, and please God will continue to do for many, many years. It's what the Sephardic world always wants to do, is to illuminate our path and bring us to a better place in the world. But it's not exclusively a Sephardic trait. It's an Ashkenazi trait. It's a Jewish trait to want to do good for the world and bring good to the world. And that's symbolic through those lights that we light on Hanukkah. And so in that spirit, by the way, speaking of Ilan and my father and the Maccabees and the war, next week, please God, when we tune in, I'm going to be speaking, I'm going to be teaching an actual speech, an address that was given that sounds like it could have been given 2,000 years ago by Judah the Maccabee or by one of the high priests to Judah the Maccabee and his brothers. It was given instead by Rabbi Uziel. Rabbi Uziel, the first Sephardic chief rabbi of the state of Israel. He was also the chief rabbi during the Ottoman Empire and the British Mandate before he became chief rabbi under the British in 1939. And then in 1948, when Israel became an official declared state, he was the chief rabbi until he passed away in 1953. Talk about somebody who brought light to the world. He was a Hanukkah flame by himself, 365 days a year, not only 8 days or 7 or 8 days. And I'll be teaching next week, please God, an address that Rabbi Uziel gave to IDF soldiers. Not IDF soldiers of my generation from the 1980s or of Ilan's generation, a much more sophisticated IDF that Ilan served in with some of the most sophisticated weapons and equipment, very different than when I served in 1984, but certainly different than when my father served in 1948. Rabbi Uziel was speaking to my father's generation of IDF soldiers, and that's what we'll be learning next week. So please join us again next week when we'll learn from a contemporary Sephardic Chacham how he felt about the miracle of Hanukkah by those who he felt were reenacting and reliving the miracle of Hanukkah by defending the Jewish homeland again and indeed providing for us a safe and secure Medinat Yisrael, a homeland. Again, remember, please, to watch your mail, your email, to register for our SEC Hanukkah Sephardic celebration Festival of Light, bringing light for 40 years to the Sephardic and Jewish world, the SEC. That's 2 weeks from tonight. Celebrities will be part of us, celebrities from Israel, celebrities from the United States, people that you've seen on television, on HBO, on famous shows, are going to be there, their greetings are going to be waiting for you. Alumni, people who have been to the SEC, kids, adults, the rabbis who study with us. We're going to light candles. We're going to sing. We're going to celebrate. It's going to be very beautiful. So please, please join us. In the meanwhile, I want to thank all of you for being with us. I want to thank again Ethan and the Sephardic Brotherhood. And I want to bless everybody with light during this month, during this dark times, and hope and pray that we all get the opportunity to celebrate Hanukkah in health, in happiness, and a lot of light. So wishing all of you a lot of light. If you have any questions, please email me, be in touch at info@secjerusalem.org. Wishing all of you in the spirit of everything we spoke about tonight, Kiner mitzvah v'Torah or, that the lamp is, the mitzvot are a lamp and the Torah is light. May you have a lot of light and lamps in your hearts and in your homes. Let's all help to bring light into this world. Thank you, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you again, please God, next week. Shavua Tov, and all the best. Thank you.